What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip, and you're listening to the Homebrewed Christianity Podcast. That's right, it's a podcast where we bring, amazing theological ingredients right into your earpiece, in whichever way it is you downloaded and are listening to this right now. And then we say we don't want to think for you, we want to think with you so that you can have some zesty theology. No more light beer Christianity is needed. We got plenty of it. And it's time to add some flavor to the church, so that you would actually want to savor what comes out of your mouth when you're talking about God. And I don't know other words that rhyme with flavor and savor except neighbor, and you're supposed to love your neighbor. There we go. I'll stop there. Anyway, today on the podcast we have Douglas Ottati. That's right, professor, theological, ethics. From the North Cackalack at Davidson University. He's on the podcast, and we're going to be talking about liberal Christianity. Not just like, liberal Christians, what do they believe? But he's going to be helping us understand, what does liberal theology look like when it's lived and embodied? What's the shape of liberal Christian piety? He's going to talk about what creation piety looks like, what redemption piety looks like. What does it mean to be a disciple and live in community and in this world as a liberal Christian? This is an episode I've been excited to share since I recorded it. Most of all, I'm excited to share it because he tackles some questions around the reality of God, discipleship, and faith for progressive and liberal Christians. And then at the end, we may get off topic and talk about politics and the election and some stuff like that. So just go ahead, get ready. And if you head to homebrewedchristianity.com and look at the post for this episode, you'll find links to some of Dr. Ottati's books. And one we bring up in here, it's a great one to begin with, is Hopeful Realism. Great book. We also talk a bit about the first volume of his systematic theology. And anyway, there's links all there on the homepage, and links to some of his older episodes. So before we jump into that, I just want to tell you a couple things. One, I am so excited that we have like 12 new members to the Homebrewed Christianity community. What's the Homebrewed community, you may say? Well, those are the people that donate every month to keep this podcast happening. And we have a community, like a secret community page that's just for the members to interact, support each other, talk into like the content, interviews, direction of the podcast. And, we have a number of new members, and I just want to give some shout outs to Scott Campbell, to Denzel, to Joshua, Tyler, Bert, Sadie, Benjamin, Alicia, Andrew, Julie. There's some more on there. I can't even read them all. But nonetheless, these are members, brand new members to the podcast. And if you want to support the podcast, you want to connect with people that are out there in the digital world who are thinking, asking questions, wrestling with their faith in a homebrewed way, then go to homebrewedcommunity.com and you can join the community. And here's the thing that we're doing right now. This month and next month, we're doing an Introduction to Theology class. It's kind of got two really long 2-hour lectures, and then that are just kind of, here's what theologians do, here's how they think through it, here's the tools. But then each week, I'm posting just for our members like a 2-hour Q&A session. Every member that asks a question, I'm going to attempt to answer it. And so if you're in the group, you're getting these each week, an additional Q&A session on top of the big lectures. So if you've been thinking about supporting the podcast, being a part of the community, seeing what it's like to connect with everybody, this is a good time because every member is invited to participate in this class, to ask questions, to get your questions answered. So go to homebrewedcommunity.com and you can do that. And, it'll be awesome. It will be awesome. Looking forward to connecting with you there, answering your questions, and keeping this conversation going. All right, here we go. This is Douglas Ottati talking about liberal Christian piety, what liberal Christianity looks like embodied in the world and community and the church. And I hope you enjoy it. And I'd love to connect with you, either as part of the community, online, like the Twitter, or Facebook. We have a great Homebrewed Facebook page. And you can always email me. Just email trip@homebrewedchristianity.com. But most important, the easiest way to always stay in the know as to what the freshest episodes are, when live events are happening, free webinars, all that kind of stuff, is to be on the Homebrewed Christianity email list. So if you want to be on the email list, then you can just text us. All right? That's right. All you have to do is text. When you text freaking awesome, that's right, freaking awesome, with no space between freaking and awesome, to 44222 in the United States, then you'll get like the first chapter to my book, and then you'll be on the email list. And every week you'll get a little email, a little note telling you what's up, telling you all the new episodes on this show, when we relaunch the Theology Nerd Show, Culture Cast, Lectio Cast. You'll be able to get links, know who's been on, and not miss a thing. Get some free stuff, get invited to all the webinars and all that good stuff. So if you text freaking awesome to 44222 in the United States of America, you'll sign on. If you don't live in the United States, then just go to homebrewedchristianity.com, and there'll be like a giant thing that pops up on the screen once you get there, and it says, can I give you like a free radical theology workshop with Jack Caputo, Peter Rollins, Barry Taylor? And you say, yeah, I do. Type your email in. You'll get a free workshop right then, sent to your email address, and then you'll be on the list, getting updates, knowing when there's webinars, and all that good stuff. So you can go to the website. You can, in the United States, text freaking awesome to 44222, and you'll know what's up. All right? Here we go. Douglas Ottati. Hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. This is Trip, and back on the podcast is the one and only Douglas Ottati. How are you doing today, Doug?
I'm fine, Trip. Hope you're doing well.
Well, any morning you get to talk to you is a fine morning. I must know what it's like to look in the mirror every morning for yourself. But I'm excited because we were talking about what we're going to talk about, and I said, look, I've done a number of like webinars recently, did a bunch of Q&As on my book tour where people that are evangelicals are asking all sorts of questions, I think, about leaving behind their theological paradigm. But most of the articulations of a Christian liberal theology are these caricatures. And so I feel like there are lots of people with intuitions towards a more like simultaneously critical and faithful account of the tradition are wanting to get introduced to options that are available that are connected to Christian piety and devotion, but not ones that deny certain types parts of our given context. And I thought, well, I am friends with Doug Ottati, who kind of is a professional at telling everyone what it means to be a liberal Christian. Who and I've been or even heard you go to church sometimes, which
occasionally I do. That's right.
Yeah. So maybe we could begin by hearing autobiographically when it was that you, as a theologian, realized that your own faith was connected to the liberal theological tradition.
Well, that would be an interesting thing and kind of hard to say. I grew up going to a place called the Presbyterian Church at Tenafly, prosaically enough. And while I was a kid there in the 60s and so forth, and a number of issues came up. Gun control, questions of civil rights, and then eventually questions of war in Vietnam, things like that. So my experience of Presbyterian Church there coming up was that these issues occasionally became relevant, and it was of some importance to try and think about them. So in terms of a social ethic, I'd say starting right there in high school. That intensify a little bit while I was at college at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And of course, I was there from 1968 to 72. So you could say loosely all hell broke out in American culture at that point. And there were a lot of different things to do, and there are things to bring up. So with respect to a social ethic pretty early on, I think, probably with respect to raising questions about what it is you believe, that pretty early on too. And I think the first place for that is, again, right back there in New Jersey growing up. We would go to the church there and hear sermons. And the way that was set up in one of those old Northern Presbyterian churches, they had the Sunday school hour for kids was the same time as the church hour. So you could either go to Sunday school or you go to church, but you couldn't do both. Kind of I think a bad scheduling idea, but nevertheless, that's the way it was. And it also meant, incidentally, that adults almost never went to Sunday school for instruction. But in any case, what that meant was that at a relatively early age, I could go hear the sermon, and I could go with my dad. My mom would teach Sunday school part of the time, but also be there. And then afterwards, my father, who was a Brazilian immigrant, named Fernando Camilo Ottati, we would go downtown and we'd pick up some cold cuts, and then we'd come home in the kitchen table, and we just argue about the sermon. Mm-hmm. And raise questions about it. Do you really think it was true? What about this? What about that? And that was a lot of fun to do. And I suppose that's the beginning of raising some critical questions about what it is you believe and what's going on. That also was something I was able to pursue in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania. Enjoyed doing that. And then later at the Divinity School at the University of Chicago. But I would say the seeds for being a liberal theologian are pretty early. My mom taught a Sunday school class when I was young. Where it was went around and asked what would someone from another planet think if they were in Tenafly, New Jersey? Would they like it? Now you're asking a bunch of kids this, and the answer they all have is, of course, a visitor would like it. The kids kind of liked it. They were having a pretty good experience. It would be just fine. And so we were talking about that, and then at a certain point, she said, "Well, what if the person from another planet didn't look like us and was green? What do you think then?" Well, it precipitates a big discussion about whether or not Tenafly is ready for a green person from somewhere else, and all that kind of stuff. And that's a way of introducing some questions in social ethics and so forth. And I would say at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, then, you've got anti-war stuff, you've got civil rights stuff going on, and questions of urban renewal and questions of that sort. Marches on Washington, in connection with the Vietnam War. And I think one of the things I was looking for was a religious tradition that might be able to make some sense of those things and engage them in some ways. And you may recall also that the Presbyterian Church has a book of confessions, and one of the things in it is called the Confession of 1967, which, if you scroll back to when I was in college, was right contemporary. And it's a very interesting document in a lot of ways. It's centered on reconciliation and so forth. And then they try to take the spectacles of reconciliation and look through those spectacles at the current world and ask what sorts of issues are highlighted if you look at the world through the spectacles of the image of reconciliation. And the answer was racial discrimination was one. That was something that worked against people being together in a reconciled and beloved community. Another thing was war and weapons of they wouldn't have called them mass destruction then, but nuclear weapons and so forth that threatened the end of humanity. And another one was poverty in a world of abundance. And a third one was sexuality and relations of men and women and so forth. They're articulated in kind of 1967-ese, but the issues hold up pretty well. And there was also a way in which my own church was able to give me something, a tool with which to try and make sense of my environment. So I'd say it began around in those years there.
So when one of the ways you even described it as looking for a religious tradition and that type of, when was it that people ever would ask that question? Right, like the question that when you're coming of age, you're looking for a religious tradition that insert some kind of values you think really should be connected to something that's ultimate. I think a lot of Christians are waking up realizing that's the question people are asking, and they aren't sure whether that's even a good way of asking it, that they're uncomfortable with seeing the Christian tradition as a tradition alongside others with multiple strains running through it. That this type of historical consciousness, where it's so much of our lives is given based on where we happen to wake up and find ourselves, and it's a really an arbitrary thing. Like if we were having this conversation as two theologians born at a different time in a different country, then it could sound really similar and yet really different. Right. What is it like to have faith in a tradition where you can see its thorough historicity and yet still want to talk about the divine and God being intimately connected and revealed in it?
Well, that's a great question, Tripp. I mean, I think one thing that's true is that you and I as theologians have no choice but to have this conversation here and now. We might want to have it in 1492, but it's not happening, and we're not there. We're here.
We could have avoided a little bit of embarrassment if in 1492 we paused a little longer on our patterns for missiology.
Well, that might be true. That may be true. I think, one thing that's true is there's a way in which particular historical traditions seem odd and a little off-putting to some contemporaries in our society. I think our society gives people the impression part of the time that that individuals are entirely autonomous and that they just agree, they begin from ground zero and they're entirely neutral and they are entirely apart from everything. I think this is a kind of false consciousness. It's false to human experience. Even if you're growing up on some cul-de-sac where all the houses look the same, it turns out that's not the same place that everyone grows up in. It's somewhere in particular. I learned that about New Jersey when I started teaching one time. I was in North Dakota, and then it finally occurred to me that North Dakota was not New Jersey, and New Jersey was not North Dakota, and I was in fact from a place that was highly historically and socially particular. But everybody is. So one thing I'd like to say about this is that when people start thinking about traditions as if traditions are particular historical matters and they themselves are apart from all of that they can simply pick and choose histories, pick and choose locations, this is false. People are embedded in history already. There's no such thing as an isolated individual apart from institutions, apart from histories, apart from societies. I've got a whole faculty over here that sometimes I think believes that they don't have anything to do with traditions and they get nervous about the word tradition. I can never figure it out. They are, after all, teaching at a liberal arts college. The last time I looked, liberal arts was, in fact, the Roman idea. Liberal arts, what a free citizen ought to know in order to be able to engage the world. It's something other than professional education or education for a particular job. The Romans already said that. That sort of educational ideal is picked up in the medieval period. It's also picked up in the Reformation. People use it, and then people spend all kinds of money and take all kinds of time and energy to try and keep that tradition going. It's one of the reasons I'm looking at this campus here with all these buildings. Just think of all the effort that goes into doing that. And they hand it on. Or, to put it simply, if you teach at a liberal arts college, you participate in a tradition whether you think you do or not. Mm-hmm. Just simple as that. Now, I think that's true of a whole bunch of things. I think that's true if you go to a public school, for example. You participate in the tradition of public education. I think it's true if you are a participant in American democracy. It's a particular historical tradition. It's not every place all the time. So when you turn to religion, it's not the case that all of a sudden all of these things fall away, and the only thing you have to do is pick ideas out of the air. That's not what's going to happen. What you're going to have is you're going to have different sorts of traditions, institutions, communities present visions. These visions will be ineluctably historically particular. They can have a high degree of flexibility to them and so forth, but they will be historically particular. They'll make proposals. They'll make proposals for how to understand human life in the world. Those proposals are things that you can evaluate. You can ask questions about them. You can evaluate them in terms of the traditions themselves, but you can also evaluate them in terms of other things that you know. But they make proposals. So same thing if you're taking a kind of anthropology course and you start investigating some Central American native communities and so forth and other communities. These communities have their own languages. They have their own traditions. They have their own way of organizing family life and so forth. And from a certain point of view, each one of those cultures makes certain particular historical proposals about what human life is like and so forth. And so do religious traditions. So I don't think it's odd that religious traditions are out there. I think what's odd is that there are a bunch of people who think that they live apart from histories and traditions. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is the false thing, if you want to know the truth. I think we got the impression because, I don't know, there's too much formica and too much standardization. It all looks the same, but it's not the same.
Well, and I think there's at least one of the gifts I think liberal theology gives to the church is the ability to recognize that we are inheriting multiple traditions and are stewards of it, and that part of being in a tradition is figuring out what fidelity looks like when it's a living thing, as opposed to the holy inerrant word of God perfectly interpreted throughout the generations clearly means the same. Or even the four gospels we have in canon aren't Trinitarian, yet they all are trying to talk about the unique way in which God was present in Christ. And they don't agree. And yet for some Christians, that the conclusion of any of the text isn't just creedal Trinitarian Christianity, is a threat to the truth of Christianity when you see the story of Israel in the biblical tradition and the early church as living traditions that we're inheriting, then there's a denial of life when all you do is repeat and regurgitate the past. You're not seizing the real gift of the tradition, which is to receive, to own it, and embody it in a unique way for your current kind of community context.
Yeah, a liberal theologian is going to think that these traditions try to shape persons in a present. They try to bequeath the kind of gift of a faithful life in a particular time and place. The traditions are kind of like a preacher. They could be likened to other things too. Preacher gets up there and delivers a sermon, and it's got a text. Maybe it's out of the lectionary, and it's out of a relatively common Bible. But as you point out right away, there are different texts in a Bible. So depending on which ones are chosen, you get a different kind of sermon. The other thing that's also true is you can have a lot of preachers preaching on the same text on the same day in the lectionary, but preaching to different congregations. And they are appointed to deliver the gospel and to talk about these things to a particular people of God in their own time and place. They're not delivered to deliver a generic everyman's sermon to everyone on the whole planet in all ages and places. They're delivered to talk to the people at the Davidson College Presbyterian Church, or the Presbyterian Church at Tenafly, or St. Peter's Catholic Church downtown in Charlotte, or something like that. That's who they're talking to. So when they do that, they have to interpret a tradition to meet the lives of people in the present. When they do that, they're not trying to be radicals or something. They're simply trying to hand on a tradition the way it's always been handed on. So when Paul does things like interpret early charismatic statements in order to talk to the Corinthians, when he interprets them further, when he's writing to the Romans, he's writing to particular congregations. He's trying to interpret the gospel as he understands the gospel in particular times and places. This, in fact, is the activity of handing on a tradition. The purpose of it is to help form people in a faithful life so that they can have a faithful relationship with God, Christ, and so forth, and with other persons. That's the idea. But in order for them to do it, you can't just pull them out of medieval Europe into some sort of ethereal location. You can't pull them out of Corinth in the early centuries of the Christian era, and you can't pull them out of Charlotte either. So you need to go ahead and preach to them. You need to interpret the tradition to them and for them. That's not a radical thing to do. That's a faithful thing to do. That's what you're doing when you do things like have catechesis and catechisms. That's what you do when you have confirmation classes. That's what you do when you have Sunday school classes. So the business of interpreting a tradition goes on all the time. It goes on in dramatic ways, and it goes on in very undramatic ways. But it always takes place at particular times and places with respect to a historical tradition. The other thing to be said, and of course you've already intimated it with the question, is the tradition itself is this big ambling, rambling thing. It's got a lot of stuff in it. It's got 4 Gospels. It's got a whole bunch of biblical texts. It's got all sorts of theologians. It's got all sorts of liturgies from different times and places. All of these things, different writers. And at different times and places, some of those things may seem more promising to be in dialogue with than at other times. Julian of Norwich. A lot of people read Julian of Norwich now. There was a time when no one knew who she was. So she has become newly relevant. She's a part of a tradition that was in the attic or in the basement, now been brought up and put on display for people in a contemporary period, and that's helpful.
So one of the theologians that spent quite a bit of time articulating the Christian faith in this way, and liberal theologians have been impacted, is Schleiermacher, when in the way he understands faith, the way he understood like Christ consciousness, and even how he understood the what the tradition proclaimed faithfully looks like. Can you describe for the listeners how Schleiermacher understood the nature of Christian faith and its place in community, and what the proclamation of the gospel looked like? Thinking of how He makes rather radical affirmations of the gospel, and does so in a different tone than kind of sin management accounts of the gospel that a lot of Protestants are familiar with in the United States, while being a rather thoroughly Protestant theologian when you hang out with him.
Schleiermacher is pretty interesting, right? Because there's a real emphasis on what he calls piety, and there's a real emphasis on the experience of persons. This is not something that is unique to him. Augustine thinks that who you are is in large part a matter of what you love, thinks that the tradition is a matter of faith and believing. Calvin thinks that the tradition is about true religion, as he will put it. And Calvin would say, for example, that he didn't want to sign the Nicene Creed as a test of orthodoxy, but he'd be willing to say it in church and to sing it and so on and so forth, and that he thinks that in it, true religion, true piety, comes to expression, but that there are other ways in which it might also come to expression in different times and places. So one of the things you have in Schleiermacher, and you also have it in Augustine and you have it in Calvin, is the idea that the core of the enterprise is not simply what's written down. The core of the enterprise is not simply the texts and simply the reflections and so forth. The core of the enterprise is those things as they relate to and intersect with, what will we call it? Attitude, disposition, heart. People are essentially, in many respects, creatures of emotion. They have a disposition toward their environment and the world. What Schleiermacher thinks will happen is true, is that religion helps to shape that piety. It helps to shape those dispositions. It helps to shape a kind of attitude toward and stance in a world. And when he talks in those ways, he can access the tradition and talk about how it's significant for the formation of contemporary persons. He thinks that he can talk about Jesus's consciousness of God that way. He thinks he can talk about true religion that way. But the big thing then for Schleiermacher is he's very, very intellectual. He's very difficult to read. He's very much a scholar. But what he's talking about, finally, is experiential. What he's talking about is something that has to do with heart and orientation in a world. And in that respect, what he's talking about is practical, and it has to do with affectivity and with emotion. It has to do with life, as it were.
Well, I think that element, something that gets picked up by people like H. Richard Niebuhr when in like the meaning of Revelation, when he talks about there being like an inside and an outside to Revelation, and how like Revelation is what makes life and history intelligible in the eyes of faith. That there's a different type of relationship to yourself, to creation, to history that comes with faith, and it's one that's experienced and one that's engaged in a different form of life, as opposed to some objective conclusions that are gained when you line the right facts up or interpretations up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, H. Richard Niebuhr wants to talk about faith as confidence in and loyalty to something that's centrally valuable. So he thinks of nationalism as a kind of a faith. He can think of racism as a kind of a faith, taking the race as the central and most important relationship and so forth. And what he thinks happens with Christianity and with Judaism is that a kind of radical monotheism is presented, where the object in which you have placed your trust and to which you are loyal is the one God who is in relation to all things. And so what you're loyal to is the principle of being and all things that exist. Now, one of the things that means for H. Richard Niebuhr in terms of your attitude toward the world is that you are valued and you are a valued participant in that universal community of being. But another thing it means is that you're not at the center of the thing. You are decentered. You are a participant in a much larger whole. Can you have confidence then that your life is meaningful and worthwhile, that it is valued, and also that the way for you to interact with other beings in relationship is to care for them, that is to be oriented toward them rather than simply your isolated self? That's kind of the big question for H. Richard Niebuhr, is whether people can undertake or take up that kind of radical faith. He thinks they can only do that as a gift by grace. Something has to happen to them. Their older orientations and faiths have to be have to be in conflict and have to fall away. Some newer kind of conviction has to come about. This is H. Richard Niebuhr trying to talk about a conversion. And in this whole tradition here with these liberal theologians, one of the great overlaps between it and evangelical Christianity is they both care about experience.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there's a sense where people that are inheritors of the liberal tradition in the United States have they've inherited the social ethics, but without this type of radical monotheism and the piety and shape of life that that really is its originators. Like when you draw the line through the Reformed tradition from Augustine to Calvin to Schleiermacher, the reason you get the protest that's there to any finality is because they're pointing towards the living body of Christ in the community, the dynamic of faith, and these type of things that just kind of shun finality because it's alive. And in one sense, the liberal tradition in America has won a lot of its social ethics fights that it has been having in the 19th and 20th century, and now is having an identity crisis because most of its children don't know how to use the word God and mean anything, and let alone something Christian.
I think the liberal tradition has been sort of at its strongest and at its best when it's engaging in a social ethic, interpreting things in a contemporary context. It has cared about things like social gospel and the distribution of wealth and so forth in society. It's cared about the position of women and minorities and the poor and things of that sort. It's done very, very well with that. it's cared about international relations and Reinhold Niebuhr and people like that. I think sometimes, and it's not Reinhold Niebuhr's fault, but I think sometimes liberals are pretty good at a list of things that they care about, a list of ethical or moral things. They're pretty bad at trying to articulate what it is they believe in terms of certain affirmations and symbols, how it works with general notions of piety and so forth. And I think they just kind of lost a little bit of a sense of how to do that. I think if you say that in some respects, what Christian piety is a matter of heart, you can then ask how biblical texts and symbols, as well as theological ideas, help to form and shape that piety. How do they help form and shape the hearts, the attitudes and the dispositions of faithful people in the world? There's an awful lot to be said there, but I think two basic points are within reach pretty easily. One is that there is a kind of creation piety. That is, that one can consider creation and life in God's world. Anybody who is going to consider these things is going to be, from a theological perspective, someone who is participating in life in God's world. What's that like? How do we shape this apprehension of what it is to be alive in God's world? How is that going to be understood? And the answer to that is that it's going to be understood in light of biblical and theological images and ideas. And one of the first obvious ones simply is the idea of creation itself. What kind of an idea is it? The idea is, I think, a very profound one. It indicates that existence, life, and capacities are good gifts. They're gifts. They're not things that we manufacture. We do not bring any of these things about. There are no self-made people. That you are and that I am constitute our first debt. We didn't do that. We didn't make ourselves. Now, that's a sort of fundamental apprehension that we depend on other things to be. Mm-hmm. And that we think it's good to be. And that's at the core of a kind of creation piety. It's not a complicated thing, I don't think. And in fact, it's experientially a very resonant thing. This weekend, I'm going to drive up to Hillsville, Virginia, on Route 77 up here, just over the border from North Carolina. I'll be in the mountains. The reason a guy named Ottati is going to be in a location like that is he's married to a girl whose last name was Nestor, and her family is from up there in the western part of Virginia. She will accompany me as my translator. That's a joke, but it's a little different for me up there. And when we go up there, her uncle Cletus is going to have his 80th birthday celebration in Hillsville, Virginia, with family up there, and they've asked me to deliver a prayer, and I know pretty much what that prayer will be like. Well, first of all, it's going to be a prayer of thanksgiving. Why is it going to be a prayer of thanksgiving? Because we will be gathered up there on a happy occasion, a celebration. What are we celebrating? We're celebrating the gift of life, and the gift of a long life in this case. And we're going to be celebrating the gift of having been invited, you might say, to the party of existence, or having been invited to it and being sustained in it. That's what that occasion is about. And it will be understood in light of an image like creation. Life is bestowed. Existence is bestowed. You owe it to another. You owe it to God that you are invited to the party of existence. That kind of interpretation of life in light of an image of creation is going to shape an attitude and a disposition. Well, one illustration of that, I forget which Woody Allen movie it is. He's trying to figure out which religion to adopt. He's trying out all of them. And at the end, he simply reflects on having gone to see Duck Soup, right? To go see a Marx Brothers film. And he's been worried about meaning of life and what happens to you when you die and all this sort of stuff. And he goes in to see the Marx Brothers and he realizes that they're not talking about that at all. You know why? Because they're having such a good time being alive, they don't have time to ask about all that stuff all the time. Now, I actually think it's kind of profound. What's going on? The Marx Brothers know you're invited to the party of existence, and part of the time you just fool around and you enjoy being invited to the party of existence. I think that's what that'll be about as an occasion up there in some ways. But look what happens then to a kind of piety when it's shaped by the idea of creation. One, you have no reason to boast, as Paul might say. If you're doing okay, you have abilities, you have a certain place in life, you didn't do it all. Much of that is given. Martin Luther would say, let us not boast or think that we've made ourselves, quote, as the proud princes do. And Martin Luther thinks you shouldn't be like the proud princes. So that has to do with attitude. Second, you've got a reason to give thanks and to be grateful and appreciative. And that's an important sort of attitude that you can bring to life in the world, to the beautiful sky, to everything else. And you can say that this being grateful starts with one's own personal life, and for many people it probably does, but it shouldn't end up there. It should also end up being an expansive attitude. There is reason to give thanks for and to cherish the gift of life in oneself, but in others and also in all living things. These are all God's valued creatures. They are all beings who have been called into life. They are all beings who have been invited to the party of existence. So this is a kind of attitude toward things, and it's shaped by the idea of creation and a tradition, but it intersects with things that are simply experientially true. People, when they reflect upon it, know that they didn't simply make themselves. Their parents had a lot to do with them. Their parents' parents had a lot to do with that. There's the question of their biological makeup. There's a question of all sorts of things in their society that they don't control. So this image then is picking up on a very fundamental aspect of human experience. What we want to say theologically then is that when you grasp that life is a bestowal and a gift, when you understand life in terms of this image of creation and in terms of a creation piety, what is the case then is that simply being alive in God's world displays the divine excellence. Divine excellence means the tendency or disposition of the Creator to go out and create things and hold them in relation with God's self and with other creatures in God's good world. And that is a fundamental gift. So one thing that can be said about Christian piety is just take an idea like creation and ask how it helps to interpret certain aspects of life in the world. That's a theological point. It's not immediately a matter of ethics, but it will in fact be related to an ethics pretty shortly and pretty shortly on. So one thing is creation piety, and we can talk about other aspects of piety, a kind of redemption piety. Perhaps we do that later. Well, but those are things I think that sometimes liberals aren't so good at doing.
Yeah, and I think part of it is really about the imagination we have when engaging the tradition in worship. That one of the places I've seen in working with ministers is their timidness to engage the tradition because they assume that that the way in which we're engaging it is and the people you're engaging it with are hearing it on terms that are really diminished. They're hearing you like read a passage and Hebrew scriptures in there, like, well, if we do that one, then I'll have to tell them I don't know if that really happened, or God kind of seems like a jerk in it. If we read the Psalm, that just seems kind of old there. Right? We might have to move around on this. Or you read a gospel text, and then you feel like there's this burden, first and foremost in worship, to explain things rationally rather than to give the tradition to them in the context of this piety. And like when you called it the party of existence, and you talk about there being like no reason to boast, this call to give thanks and cherish all living things, to that is like a much cooler thing to discuss, pass on, and participate in than another discussion about evolution in the middle of a worship service or something like that. Like, not that we can't do that in our education time. We totally can. Like, not threatened at all. It's just you don't pass down piety by talking about Darwin not really being a threat. You pass down piety about it's showing us what it's like to know our finitude and know ourselves as known and loved by God when we're looking at stars or praying at a gathering with our family or over a meal with our neighbors. Like, to recognize that we're inheriting that shape and form of life and get the beautiful gift and calling to pass it on. Like, that to me is what has a lot of our battles in American Protestantism with evangelicals has meant we focused on the wrong thing. We'd rather dedicate hours to the Jesus seminar rather than a poet. And that's been where I feel like a lot of our piety has started to be diminished.
Yeah, Tripp, you mentioned the Psalm, so let's just take a moment and go through parts of Psalm 148. What the heck's not going to kill anybody, and probably be good.
Well, if you're listening and you aren't used to reading the Bible, just listening to podcasts with people that talk about it, you just don't wreck.
Yeah, that's right. Don't wreck. It'll be okay. Praise the Lord from the heavens. Praise him in the heights. Praise him, all his angels. Praise him, all his host. Praise him, sun and moon. Praise him, all you shining stars. Praise him, you highest heavens, and you waters above the heavens. Let them praise the name of the Lord, for he commanded, and they were created. This is a hymn of praise. What's going on here? Are these people claiming that waters actually speak? Are they claiming that the moon writes in language? No. They're claiming that these things, simply by being themselves, praise their Creator. They praise their Creator because why? Because he commanded and they were created. They've been invited to the party of existence, and it's a good thing. And so the first thing that happens here is we talk about the heights, the heavens, the moon, the stars, the sun, praising God simply by being what they are. Okay, next thing that happens is he established them forever, and he fixed the bounds which cannot be passed. The earth is ordered in that way. Then we go next, praise the Lord from the earth, you sea monsters in all deeps, fire and hail, snow and frost, stormy wind fulfilling his command. Here, again, I don't think the point is that hail speaks, that hail is going to write a poem. But the idea is there is a sense in which fire and hail, snow and frost are in fact existentially articulate. They are participants in the party of existence too, and they praise the Lord by being what they are. And so also the sea monsters, which is a nice thing to have included here, so that you don't get the impression that the Hebrews simply thought nature, raw and tooth and claw, was simply there for your and my benefit. There were things that scare you and that you may not like, but they praise God too, including the sea monsters. And so this hymn, this poem goes on. And the idea then is that people and all things praise God together. What are they doing? They are giving thanks for being invited to the party of existence. They are understanding that they do not make themselves as the proud princes may claim that they do. They are grateful and they are appreciative. You can cherish life in God's world. Now, that's a poem. And there's nothing here that contravenes evolutionary theory or anything like that. But it's an important poem. And the point then is that simply existing is a way of praising your maker and your creator. It is a way of participating in the excellence of existence.
And I think that when this type of creation piety is shared, the same type of response can come studying science and nature in ways that ancient people never had the ability to do. And it's really a non-competitive relationship rather than a threat to quiet our prayers long enough to get defensive.
Oh, I think that's exactly right. When we go to another psalm, we go to Psalm 8, and we get the line that when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? This is a magnificent poem here. Well, that's the idea. The idea is, and we don't want any of the listeners who are in their cars to do this immediately. What they want to do is find a nice place this evening, go look at the nighttime sky, sit back there maybe with their favorite libation or something, look at those stars and ask, wow, who am I that I'm part of all of this? I'm part of this really, really big thing. who are human beings that they have a place and a time, and who am I that I have a place and a time with these stars that are thousands of light years away, and light that's coming from places that may not even exist any longer, and so on and so forth, and a history of billions upon billions of years. Here I am sitting on my branch, having a nice glass of wine, looking at the stars and the moon. What sense does that make? Who am I that I'm in that position? And nevertheless, I've been made a little lower than some other beings of glory, because I have certain abilities. I can look at these stars. I can think about them. Now, if you can't be impressed by looking at a nighttime full of stars in the 21st century, then I just feel sorry for you. I don't know what to say about that. Science has not robbed you of the possibility of having a religious emotion in relationship to a nighttime sky. It has enhanced it. Think of those distances. There were times when people thought that what the stars were windows where people had opened their shades, and they had a candle in there. Now there's a cozy little universe for you. They didn't think that the light they were looking at could be thousands upon thousands of years old and started on its journey to you before there were any human beings at all. That is a remarkable thing. And it turns out that you and I are parts of this whole creation that starts with Big Bang and all sorts of different sorts of cosmic dust and things like that, and that we literally are constructed out of the stuff of stardust. Now, you can get all that by looking at the nighttime sky. And if you look at the nighttime sky, and after that, all you can really say is, look at me, I made myself, there's something the matter with you. No one ought to think that on the basis of the science.
Yeah.
So I actually think that the contemporary world is poetically in pretty good shape, and that the sciences have helped it be in pretty good shape and very often enhance it.
Well, one of the things that in the Psalm 8, that notion of not just the grandeur of creation, but that God is mindful of you, is connected to one of the places I think mainline, more progressive Christian piety is atrophied. And that's the kind of like personal type imagery around God. Last week I was in Vancouver with John Cobb and Sally McFay, and this was one of their the points they both argued in very different ways. John argued that he regrets changing all of his language around God to take Abba out, because now the shape of so many Christian piety is not one that Jesus had related to the one he called Father. And he's like, we should have had way more fathers and way more mothers, and not just God or only creation imagery, but that Jesus hooks the creation imagery of the Hebrew scriptures with this God who's immediately present, cares, and knows even the ones he's going to challenge to transform their life for the commonwealth of God. And Sally makes the same, heard this and adds on and says that, when she knew she wanted to become a theologian, when she was in grade school, and I can't remember who told it to her, but was said, you can love God because God loves all of your body. And she goes, well, that is an affirmation worth spending a lifetime about. And it's sad to see theologians who for real concerns around the power of language and things diminish the intimacy that comes with God, as like the mother who breastfed you, held eye contact, and can never let go, or the mother hen, or Abba, and these type of imagery. How does the creation piety connect to these more personal images of God that shape piety differently?
The scriptures are a kind of riot of different images. There are all sorts of images. Some of those images are non-personal. Some of them are impersonal. Some of them are highly personal with respect to God and other things. You can talk about personal images of God. It's not necessarily always comforting. You can go to the book of Job, for instance. Job feels personally persecuted by a personal God. So you can have that sort of a thing. There are all sorts of images here. How does that work with creation piety? I mean, let's think about some of the experiences involved in the gift of life. Your life, my life, anyone else's life. They're born. Now, look, being born, last time I looked, was something that most people who get born don't remember themselves about their own birth. But there are other people there usually. There's a mother giving birth. There might be a father around. There ought to be a father around. There can be some physicians around and so forth. Is this an entirely non-personal experience? To be born and to come out of your mother's body, to be there with her, to have her hold you and so forth. Part of what it means to have a place and a time in existence, a place and a time in life, to be invited to the party of existence, means things like many people have mothers. They have mothers who take care of them and nurture them. The idea there of God like a mother is that God, the creator, nurtures people and mediates a gift of life to them in and through, among other things, mothers. And, that's a highly and deeply personal relationship. You can talk about fathers and about the dependence of children on fathers and the protection that fathers may provide and the support that fathers may provide. And this turns out to be another rich area of human relationship for metaphors and images about one's relation to God. So when one talks about it may be that at some level God is incomprehensible, But that doesn't mean that you have to eliminate all of the images, and it doesn't mean that you have to eliminate all of the images of any particular sort in order to talk about what it is to be alive. And the idea then is that to be alive, to be called into existence, is in fact to be valued in some way, to be valued and to be in relationship with the one who calls things into existence. So that, I think, is a deeply personal thing. It doesn't have to only be personal. I think the other things, then when you go look at, the Grand Canyon or something, okay, this whole thing here is called into existence and also stands in that relationship. It is true of birds. It is true of rocks. And it is true of Alpha Centauri, whatever it is out there in some other galaxy. Those things are all called into existence and held in existence, and they are valued then, and they are to be cherished because of their value.
When you describe the different parts of creation, poetically describing as praising God, and then you think of human beings having this dignity, and yet that type of piety is something we learn and is often a challenge. Most of us don't just by our own being testify the glory of God. That's human beings have a unique predicament and situation to deal with. And so I'm interested, when you were describing earlier about the piety of redemption, how these a piety that's really about the gifted and givenness of your existence and value, how that's connected to piety that comes out of honesty and about our reality and brokenness and the transformation and healing and things that are possible.
Well, one thing on some of this, as we get to Psalm 148, one can say that all of these creatures and hail and so forth praise God in one large system. But then again, it is the human being who is able to write the psalm of praise and to envision them that way. And it is the human being who is able to articulate this in terms of language and then also engage in explicit acts of worship and to be oriented a certain way. So while it's true that the human being praises God like all these other things praise God, it is also true that the human being exercises his own distinctive capacities in doing so: language, imagination, vision, and some notion of relationship and so forth. So I think that's also pretty important. In terms of redemption piety and so forth, there would be a couple of things going on. One is that the notion that human beings are often, or maybe entirely, corrupted and misoriented, that they chronically bring about things that don't work, that they're chronically curved in on themselves and their own isolated communities, that they chronically have problems with others and without groups, that they are trying to vouchsafe their own value through their own actions all the time and are unable to do it. that they have things that they value, but they can't control all relevant outcomes, but they try like hell anyway to control them. Maybe sometimes they do that with their kids, and can't really do it. And what they need is a kind of freedom or release from this continued effort to simply self-recommend and this continued effort to build their own value on their own activities. They need to realize that they simply are valuable. They need to realize that this is not something that they need to work hard to obtain. It's simply already there. And it's already there, as we've said, with this notion of creation. But what happens is that people, having been gifted with this kind of possibility in creation, they go off center. They go out of kilter. They go in a wrong direction, and they try and claim that they themselves have put this all together, that somehow they can vouchsafe their own value. And that's really kind of a despairing thing. You can be, I think, sympathetic to them. People have limited abilities significant but limited abilities to bring about certain outcomes, and significant but limited abilities to predict outcomes. But then they have things that they love very much, that they would very much like to guarantee. And the heck of it is they can't. So let's take a simple thing. You have a child or something like that. You would like to protect that child so she or he grows up in complete and perfect health, with a great education and all sorts of possibilities all the time. But in fact, you don't have the capacity to guarantee that. You have to, at points, understand that you can't, but you can try. You can try really hard to control the whole environment all the time. You can overreach and try and control. That's a kind of a problem. Or you can decide that you're so traumatized by the possibility of things going wrong that you're just going to sit around and have a bunch of drinks and forget about it, and you're going to under-participate in trying to raise that child. It's a tricky thing to work with significant but limited capacities for intervention and to try and bring up a child. You can do some things, but you can't do other things. You may love that child more than your own life itself, but you can't guarantee. Now, what happens with redemption piety is a kind of representation, I think, of what's already implicit in creation. That is, because you are valuable. That what you have is a gift of renewed life on the part of the God who gives life. How does Paul talk about this when he gets into Romans? He pulls a kind of funny exegetical move, really. He goes back to Abraham and says, now look, Abraham, who is the father of the whole religion and of us all, turns out to be someone who's around before Sinai and before the law. So Abraham isn't valuable to God because he fulfills the law. There is no law. Can't be the case. What is it that happens with Abraham? Abraham believes, trusts in the God who creates, the God who calls things into existence that do not exist, trusts that God to give him and Sarah a son when they're too old to have a son. Trusts the God who creates to be the giver of life. And that, Paul says, is counted to him, is reckoned to him as righteousness and justification. And then he wants to say that for people in a Christian community, the death and then resurrection of Jesus functions similarly. That is, people can trust the Creator who gives life and then gives new life out of death. They trust God is capable of that. And when they do that, they have an experience of the God who gives life. And they have an experience of grace, meaning that this simply is given. So now this is a possibility, and it's now opened up to persons beyond the historical Jewish community and so forth, Paul thinks, because Paul's going on a mission to the Gentiles and all sorts of things. And in order for them to stand in a kind of saving relationship with God, to understand they are valued by God, they don't need to follow the law. The people of God has been opened up to all nations, as was promised through Abraham. And it's been opened up by faith in the God who gives life. Mm-hmm. And that faith means, if you have faith in the God who gives life, then you understand you yourself are a beneficiary of God's grace. You yourself are valuable. And so are others valuable. This is the big thing forgotten. somewhere along the way, when you're trying to vouchsafe your own importance and through your own works or merits, make yourself important or valuable, you already are.
So how do you see the cross functioning as a symbol in Christian piety? Because I know the number of hymns around the cross outdo every reference to it in the literature in the New Testament. But in the history of the church, the cross has become to play a very significant role in the piety around redemption.
Yeah, well, the cross is a big deal, isn't it? I mean, if you go to Paul doesn't have any gospels in front of him. He doesn't have knowledge of a connected narrative about Jesus. What he does have is he has access to certain summaries of the Christ event. Jesus died and then was buried and then was raised. That's what he's got. And then he also understands that the Lord then appeared to members of the church. So you see this in 1 Corinthians 15. This is the deck of cards he's working with. And so he looks at that sequence or pattern and asks what that sequence or pattern says about God. And then you get an argument like that God brings, that God raises Jesus from the dead, means that the God who gives life and calls into existence things that are not and gives new life. He makes that kind of an argument. When you get to something like to the Gospels, you have a kind of narrative traditions that grow up that say a lot more than simply Jesus was crucified, buried, raised, and appeared. They've got whole stories that go with them. And so you now have the possibility of talking about Jesus as teaching, Jesus as acting in certain ways and embodying a way of life. And you also have the possibility of talking about Jesus empowering that life, and there's talk about the cross. The Gospels themselves once were called by Ernst Käsemann passion narratives with extended introductions. They're odd little literary things. They spend an awful lot of time talking about Jesus getting in trouble and then being crucified and so on and so forth. This turns out to be a big event, and they can give answers as to why that happens in terms of a kind of a narrative. Basically here, for the whole Christ event here should be something that one wants to talk about in terms of redemption. So Jesus comes teaching the kingdom or the reign of God, and he embodies that reign or style of rule in his own life and actions, as well as the kind of life that fits with that reign or that rule. And he also empowers the manner of life that fits with God's kingdom, will, and purpose. So what happens here? Jesus wants to teach that the kingdom, God's kingdom, is a rule of justice and mercy. In that respect, he's continuous to the prophets. So you said you were going to have Walter Brueggemann at a conference pretty soon, and it's one of the points I'm sure he'll make. God's kingdom is a rule of justice and mercy. So Jesus and the prophets want to claim that this is a kingdom that is in some respects unlike most human kingdoms and reigns, because God's justice is not simply divisive or retributive. It's uplifting, it's life-giving, and it's restoring. God's justice concentrates especially on those who are outcast and being hurt, the quartet of the vulnerable, as Nicholas Waltersdorf calls it, and that is the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger or the alien within your gates. Special concern to integrate those into a community of justice and of fulfillment. So the idea then is that God's reign is just in the sense of making for full and abundant life, bringing people together to participate in a good life together. So there is a sort of notion of a kingdom, and it's like other human reigns, but it's pretty different than most human reigns because they are not just and they are not community making in those ways. Jesus teaches that. But Jesus then also embodies and displays this manner of life and also this message of the gospel in what he says and what he does as well as what he says. One of the things, for instance, that happens in the gospels, well, Jesus eats and drinks with all the wrong people. He does it all the time. Levi is a tax collector. He gets called. Immediately he responds, and then Levi invites Jesus and Jesus' disciples to a big dinner in their honor. Now, what's happened here? The tax collector, who is probably dishonest, who is in league with occupying forces and an occupying government, has now got money, goodness knows how they get it, and is now going to throw a party for you and your disciples. And what does Jesus say? Oh, my goodness, I couldn't possibly go to a party that's put together from ill-gotten gains or something like that. Not on your life. They go. They go and they recline at table and have a grand old time. And while they're doing it, they get asked by some other figures, why are you doing this? Why are you hanging around with tax collectors and sinners? Why are you eating with them? Constantly, Jesus is going to eat and drink with all the wrong people. Why? Because when you know somebody in general in life, well, that's nice. But if you have them to your house or you go to their house and you eat at their table and you drink wine with them, now you are each other's people. You are a community. So what's being demonstrated in these things is that Jesus welcomes all. He's invited to go to Levi's house, but in going to Levi's house, he welcomes Levi. Now, this is a very big deal. And what's being demonstrated? What's being demonstrated again is that God's reign is a reign of grace and mercy that includes all. Everyone's invited to the party of existence. Everyone's invited to the party of new life. Doesn't matter who you are. Okay, so we've got that sort of thing with people having dinner together, and look what's going to happen, and then there's going to be a Last Supper too, and all these sorts of things. Eating and drinking together, and then, of course, you will eat and drink together again in the kingdom of God as one community. So here is a great symbol then about the renewal of life and the redemption and so forth, being invited to a party, literally, to eat and drink, to be reconstituted as a community, being invited even though you were corrupt, even though you didn't do things properly, even though you've got major problems. Nevertheless, in a reconciled community of people who understand they don't always do things right, of people who understand they don't deserve it, you are a participant. And you know that's better than the corrupted way of trying to go it alone. Well, then Jesus embodies and displays this manner of life in all sorts of ways, and he does it with eating and drinking with the wrong people. And then Jesus empowers this kind of life. How can you take up this sort of life? Well, one way you can do this is because the crucifixion of the kingdom-minded person, the one who cares about others, who tells you that you are accepted, and who tells people that there ought to be a just reign that's different from the way things go now and includes different people and the vulnerable. That person himself is going to be crucified because of our sins. And that is going to be, as I've said on some other occasions, the right nightmare and the right revulsion. It is a measure. It is a portion of grace because it helps people. It motivates people to turn away from their sins, from their corruption, and their focus only on themselves in isolation, toward mercy, toward love, and toward justice for others. The result, the wages of sin, are death. Whose death? The death of the innocent. That's the wages of sin. So there's that, the right nightmare. And then also because by raising Jesus from the dead, God ensures that, quote, Jesus still comes today, in the words of an old hymn. And Jesus is still with the Christian community in the experience of, in its preaching, in its teaching, in its sacraments, and so forth. So you continue to have the right nightmare, and you continue to have the promise of renewal, and it's present in the preaching, in the teaching, and in the sacraments. Those are fundamental things for creation piety. You can tell this stuff by looking at Luke 24, if you like, on Jesus' appearance to disciples on the road to Emmaus. They don't recognize him. They're a little bit dunderheaded. And he teaches them all about the scriptures and everything else. And he stays with them and all this. And then finally, he breaks bread with them at the camp, and they recognize him in the breaking of bread. So it's a story of Eucharist. It's a story of Lord's Supper. And then, boom, he vanishes like that. Now, what's going on here? What's going on here is that Jesus still comes to the Christian community after his crucifixion, that he still comes in preaching and instruction. He still comes in the sacraments and the breaking of bread. And so they have an experience of the risen Lord. They have an experience of the one who teaches that God's kingdom is a rule of justice and mercy, who embodies a life and eats and drinks with all the wrong people, and who is the right nightmare and also participates in, and makes for new possibilities beyond tragedy. They have all of that present to them. Now, what do those narratives and images and teachings, how do they shape Christian attitudes and piety? And I think that's a big deal. We can relate them to an ethic, but before we relate them to an ethic, we might simply want to say they relate to a different attitude toward life as a gift, a different attitude toward renewal and new possibilities as gifts. And that's one of the big things going on.
One of the things about that Emmaus story that I think is instructive for progressive Christians is that the identification of Jesus is at the table, and it wasn't in apparently the most amazing exegesis of the Hebrew Scriptures that explained everything that Jesus had said and done. And I mean, it's all there. It wasn't memorable, even though this was like straight up Jesus interpreting the Hebrew Scriptures for someone. But the identification came at the table, and I think that we often miss that was the essential place to give the content and experience, the content of the teaching, that's where it's experienced, not in just the word as proclaimed, but right. It's the word as food.
The word is proclaimed, and also together with the word as sacrament, right? So or a visible word, if you like. And so you can ask things like, wonder what Jesus really looked like, right? I mean, no one really knows what Jesus really looked like. And you can pick up all sorts of little Sunday school books and make stabs at it. And the good news about that is when they portray Jesus, they try and portray Jesus in a way that people can relate to Jesus. The bad news is that since they portray Jesus in a way that people can relate to him, they probably don't think that Jesus is particularly different from them at all. And so you get a Sunday school book like I grew up with. Jesus looked like a white guy from New Jersey, basically, with longer hair. He didn't look particularly Semitic. His hair wasn't curly. He wasn't short. He was handsome. I don't know. There you are. Or you can get one of those liberation portraits of Jesus, and Jesus looks like a mestizo, something like that, an Indian or something in Central America. Good, okay, means you can relate to Jesus. But one of the problems is you may not understand how different Jesus is from you, and so forth. What does Jesus look like? How can you get a picture of Jesus? The answer out of this particular passage on the road to Emmaus is Jesus looks like Lord's Supper. Jesus looks like a bunch of people coming together for a common meal. Jesus looks like a bunch of people coming together and being nourished and all being welcomed to a common meal. That's what he looks like. Now, that's a very, very powerful thing. And it's been one of the central points of the tradition through the ages. It's been interpreted a lot of different ways. There are all sorts of, and I know you know all about it, all sorts of elaborate interpretations of metaphysically what's going on here and everything else. But let's just make it simple, shall we? Jesus looks like, if you want a picture of Jesus, you can try drawing it, and great artists have done it and done well, or you can just go to a Lord's Supper, to a Eucharist, and you can see it.
Mm-hmm. So, one other question that, and I've been asked this a bunch of times by listeners to bring it up whenever seems to make sense in interviews, is to ask theologians what their own kind of personal patterns, practices of piety look like. Like what, because a lot of people will, especially if you're leaving behind a faith that's connected to certainty, wonder what a piety and what kind of practices Christians have after that. And so, can you describe what it looks like to practice your faith personally, as a theologian, and maybe give some advice or invitation to Christians that are in the business of revisioning, understanding, criticizing their faith to take heart?
Well, I think one thing is to is to realize that there are a lot of different ways of going about this. And one of the first things I suppose I'd say is, well, let's everyone just calm down now and see what goes on in a lifetime and see where it looks like there are interstices and where it looks like there are openings to a kind of religious sensibility and a piety, and one shaped by some of these stories. Let's just take this Eucharist stuff that we've been talking about here. If I'm right about this, then the Lord's Supper and the Eucharist is based in the dinner practice of Jesus eating and drinking with all the wrong people all the time. That's what's based in. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and pretty much figure that many of the listeners of this podcast and so forth occasionally go somewhere and have dinner, and it's real nice, and have a few glasses of wine and so forth and enjoy themselves. Okay?
Safe assumption.
That's safe assumption, and that's a Eucharist. That is a supper. That is a way that Jesus looks. That is an experience of the kingdom in some way. So you just want first just to take some ordinary things and say it. They are big deals. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that some listeners of the podcast have been to Seders and so forth, and particularly if they've grown up in Christian families, they may be particularly moved by these things because of the service at table with everyone, eating and drinking together. This is a big deal. A meal is not just physical nourishment. It is literally that. It is also social and existential nourishment. It is life-giving. Common meal is life-giving, and it makes for a community, and it makes for a good life together. So one thing that I would say in terms of just general practice, and one of the things I try and keep in mind in my own life is sometimes when you're not really thinking about it, when you're not really going to church or anything else, well, you're just having a meal together with people, and that is pretty remarkable and pretty terrific. That's one thing to think of. I think there's some other things like this. If the psalmist says that you can look out into the night sky, you can look out into the night sky. You can do that anytime you like, and that will be fine. And you can look out and you can ask about your place in the cosmos and in God's world and so forth in relation to all these things. That's magnificent. You can do something like Psalm 104 and start thinking about all sorts of different things in the world and how they're ordered and fit together, and different creatures are provided for and so forth. A kind of a psalm that gives you a kind of a sense of the divine excellence in the ecology of things and the way they're set up. And that also will be very, very important. So I think all those things are true. Now there's some other things we can talk about. We can talk about a regular worship in a community. It's a good thing to do. What does it mean? I mean, you're not necessarily going to worship with your best friends on earth. They may be people that you kind of know, and some of them that you like, and some of them that you don't particularly like. That doesn't really matter. You go there together because you are going to symbolize in a fragmentary way a community, true communion with God and community with others. You're going to symbolize that fragmentarily. And it'll be a good thing to try and symbolize and to point to, even if you point to it in a fragmented way, because that's really, in some respects, a description of the kingdom. People are in communion with God and in community with one another, and they're going to be there forever, so they may as well practice now. And they need to practice a lot, I think, because if people come from east and west and north and south to sit at table in the kingdom of God and have dinner together for eternity, and from all over the different places, it's going to be a big surprise. I have a hard time making it through Thanksgiving meal with Uncle Ed. So I better practice up, because it's not going to just be Uncle Ed. It'll be all these other characters too. The common worship in a community is very, very important, and to have the word exposited and sacraments and so forth explicitly, liturgically done. That's great. There are other sorts of things. There are prayer books and so forth. Myself personally, I kind of like the book of the personal dimensions of the Book of Common Worship of the Presbyterian Church. It's a nice. You can get that part of the book separate, and it's got morning prayer and evening prayer, and you can adapt those things and use them yourself. You can, of course, read the Bible and Scripture and think about those things. But I think what I would mostly want to point to are a set of practices, some of them formal and some of them explicit, like going to a worship service or using a prayer book, and some of them less formal and not explicit, like taking a walk and looking around and just noticing how great some of these trees are out here. Or eating and drinking with the right people, wrong people, whatever. Something like that. I think those things will also be very, very important. And then I think the other thing is you want also to appreciate the excellence that is demonstrated by the involvements of some persons when they care for others. And they can do that in ordinary ways, and they can do that in extraordinary ways. The idea of a Christian piety is one that's shaped by creation piety and redemption piety. One that's shaped so that one gives thanks for the gift of life and also has senses of justice together with special concern for those who are vulnerable, and also understands the value and cherishes the gift of life and of existence in which all things participate. That is a kind of base attitude. And what that's going to do then is going to give you a kind of attitude toward things. The attitude that's supposed to take place is this: an old person curved in on himself, trying to justify himself, trying to make his life worthwhile all the time, trying to control relevant outcomes for the things that he loves and appreciates. That's an old person, and the idea is that old person needs to be put to death. And a new person needs to arise and emerge. The new person is opened up toward God and others. The new person is a new creature, a new creation. And that new person, says Paul, ought to live in a manner that is worthy of the gospel. What is the manner that's worthy of the gospel? Simple, simple, simple. Look not to her or his own interests, but to the interests of others. Be freed from the rat race of trying to establish your own worth and identity all the time. Be freed from that to recognize the divine excellence, the wonderfulness, the gift of existence in which you and others participate, and cherish and value that gift in yourself and in others. Pretty simple. And that turns out to be something that's very difficult for people to do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's definitely not easy.
Yeah.
So, as we're wrapping up, you're finishing your Christology, and I'm interested in hearing what was the biggest surprise to you as a theologian sitting down, writing the second volume of a systematic theology. What was this discovery that you weren't quite expecting as you wrote hundreds of pages about Jesus and faith and church? So what was that? What was the part where you're like, oh, I didn't see this one coming?
Well, one thing that has impressed me a lot, there have been a number of things, but one is a pretty simple thing here. Paul has at his disposal a couple of summaries. Jesus dies, Jesus is raised, Jesus appears. And on that basis, though he could have been clearly familiar with some other traditions too, but largely on that basis, he comes up with things like, you should live in a manner that's worthy of the gospel. And the answer to that is a manner that's worthy of the gospel, or the shape of that is that you look not only to your own interests, but to the interests of others. That's his picture of it. He gets that largely out of died, buried, raised, appeared. And then you are going to die and rise with Christ, and so on and so forth. So far as I can tell, he may not even know of a list of Jesus' teachings and sayings. He is doesn't really have a sense of a whole gospel story and so forth. Now then you get these narrative traditions in the New Testament, in the four Gospels and so forth, and they are much more extended in terms of, they take this pattern, and the pattern now has to do with born and baptized and mission, and does all these things and teaches and gets in trouble and is crucified and is buried and is raised and appears, and have this full narrative. All kinds of teachings. Parable of the Good Samaritan, so forth. all these sorts of things to explain basically what is truly valuable, what is the law, and what is required of you, and so forth. The amazing thing to me is that Paul should come so close to saying the same thing that these other things say. How does he do that? I'm not sure I know. Without the benefit of looking at a whole bunch of Jesus' teachings and so forth, he still gets look not to your own interests, but the interests of others, which looks like not a bad summary of love of God and neighbor. Last time I looked, it doesn't say love of Ottati in the middle of the thing. That's the big thing that's left out. What we've got is these others. How did he get that? He looks at the shape of what Joe Sittler, my old teacher, used to call the shape of this engendering deed, which he has in a very summary form. And he works with it, and he ends up in a place that intersects pretty well with these longer and more narrative gospels. And I think that is one of the amazing things. So I would say that's one of the things that has surprises maybe. It's kind of surprised me.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk. And I'm going to be eagerly looking forward to reading the Christology when it's ready. Now, if people have not read the first volume, it's Theology for Liberal Protestants, and it's Doctrine of God and Creation, and it's Erdman's as the publisher. So if you haven't checked that out, you should go do it. And I just recently read Hopeful Realism. It was great. I had never read it before.
Well, I enjoyed working on that book, a series of essays to try and nail down again a kind of a piety, a kind of disposition toward things in the world. I think it's a good creation, but things have gone wrong, and you're not surprised when things continue to go wrong, but nevertheless, you hope for and you look for new possibilities. That's a kind of an attitude toward the world. It's realistic, but it's hopeful, and I think it's the sort of thing that corresponds with Christian faith and Christian believing, and it leads to a kind of piety again, a kind of way of engaging in the world. You don't expect everything to work out fine all the time. You're not surprised when there is destruction and death, but you continue to look for new possibilities and hope, and that seems to me works out quite well. You know, one thing we didn't talk about, Tripp, is just to make a move toward the ethics. If you take something like look not only to your own interests, but not to your own interests, but the interests of others. You take something like being specially concerned with the quartet of the vulnerable, the poor, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, or the resident alien within your gaze. There is a kind of general orientation and an ethic here. And the ethic is one of caring for others and of trying to build relationships and so forth. And I think in the year 2016, then turns out to be a nice election year and so forth. A lot of Christians face some very, very direct choices in terms of the politics of this country. The choices are never optimal. It's probably never have exactly all that one agrees with and so forth. But it does seem to me they're pretty stark choices. And while it's the case that you can't just take a Christian ethic and come up with a political platform, it is true that some political platforms do not look like they operate in the same directions. And that's easy to see, I think.
Yeah. And I think the other part of it, and you even talk about it in the Hopeful Realism book, is how oftentimes the best forms of idealism can lead to us failing to be faithful and participate and engaged when we're stuck dealing with the real world.
Oh yes, I think that's right too. And one is called to engage the world that you're actually in. That is so-called the real world. Now, whose fault is it finally that you have to engage the world that you have to engage in your own time and place? Well, theologically, the answer to that question is easy. That's God's fault. You got put here and now. And so you might as well get used to it and try and engage the realities of your own time and place. It may mean that you can't make things work out perfectly, but you can sure as heck try to keep them from getting worse and make them a little better. And that's what's possible for you.
Mm-hmm. All righty. Well, I'm I'm sure that we will get to talk again, because I always enjoy talking to you.
Well, I'll enjoy it, and that Christology actually is not too far from being ready to read, and I'm going to send you the parts of it when I've got it, because I'd be interested in what you have to say.
All right. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to it, and I'll at least get to see you in November at AAR.
Yep.
Excellent.
I forget where it is this year.
San Antonio.
San Antonio. There you go.
Well, Saturday night of AARs, we're going to do the podcast live, and we're doing Elizabeth Johnson's going to come.
Okay.
And I'm excited about it, and we're still putting together everything. But don't worry, I'm sure you'll get an email, because I always try to send messages to everyone.